but you also go through times in leadership when they're not.
Yeah.
And what happens in those times is you question everything. You question your calling. You question, am I the right person for this? Am I doing this for me, or what's going on? Why am I doing what am I doing? And what happens is you feel this kind of weight that's very different to how you would to anything else you'd ever felt before. And the struggle's very, very real. We went through a.
What is it that you're hoping for? What is it that you're waiting for? Hey, welcome back to the Inspire Hope podcast, where we are planting hope for kingdom growth. If you're still alive today, that God is not done with you yet. The ultimate gift is to say yes to Jesus. There's nothing more inspiring than God being at work in people's life through their stories. We are Samuel and Rachel, and we are the host of this podcast. I have with me Pastor Jamie. Pastor Jamie, how are you doing today?
I'm great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for having me on the podcast, Samuel.
It is a pleasure to have you. Let me start with the first question I have for you, Pastor Jamie. Take us back to the early days. What kind of environment shaped your faith, and who were the key voices that influenced you?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think one of the things is, I mean, I grew up in a Christian home as a child. My mum had a strong faith. I was involved in church life. She was a youth leader within the church environment, so I grew up within that environment.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, when I was young in my teenage years, my parents, my mum and dad, they got divorced, and that massively affected my faith.
Mm.
So my parents, they were kind of, I don't know if you've been in a church and there's a couple where you kind of look at and you think, that's what a Christian couple looks like.
Mm.
Well, that was my parents. They were both actively involved in church. As a family, were heavily involved. So when they separated, when they got divorced, what that did is that really kind of affected me in a big way. So I rebelled against church. I pushed back. I went my own way. And I think it wasn't that I didn't believe in God anymore. It was the fact that I was just angry with him.
Mm.
So I kind of went off and rebelled. And then there was times later in life where I came back to faith around 18, 20 for a little while, and then was sort of hurt by a church that I was part of. And then I was out of faith for a long, long time. I was working in the sales and marketing industry for a young lad, doing quite well for myself. And with that came nights out and a particular lifestyle. And I remember getting to the stage where I'd been out of church for a long, long time. And it was almost like I believed in God, but I just decided that Jamie's way was the way that I wanted to do things.
Mm.
So that's what I did. And I remember in the sort of mid 2005, I bumped into a long-term friend of mine who you've had on the podcast, John Cook.
Yeah.
And I bumped into John, who I'd known from back in my teenage years. And John said, "Hey, look, I'm planting a church. Do you want to come?" And I sort of said, "Well, yeah, all right then, that's great." Ignored it. And then sort of 6 months down the line, I walked into what was a very small church in Newcastle in the northeast of England. And I walked into this church and there was 20, 30 people there, and they just started doing worship. That was kind of one guy and a guitar and that kind of thing. And I walked through the door and I was just had this profound sense that I'd come home, that I walked back into the environment that was the right place for me to be. And from that moment, I rededicated my life to God. I said, "Look, God, I'm sorry for living my own way. I come back to you." And that for me was a big turning point. At the time, I was living with my girlfriend at the time. We separated, and I pushed very quickly into my faith. And what it did was my priorities shifted overnight. No longer was it about Jamie and Jamie getting everything that Jamie wanted. It was I want to serve God and I want to be everything he's called me to be. So really the question, what was the turning point? Well, that was that moment of rededicating my life to God. Who were the key players in that? God used John Cook massively in that environment.
Wow.
John is somebody who has been a mentor, a strong male role model to me for a number of years, and God's placed him in my life to really help me walk a journey, I think. And I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for God using John and some other great male role models over the years who've helped guide and equip my faith. So I think that's kind of that for me is what it is. God's put great men in my life to help shape who I am as a
Yeah.
godly man serving Jesus.
Wow. Well, to our listeners, if you missed that episode with John, you should go back and listen to John's and listen to his life and how, he even impacted you, Jamie. God has a way of bringing people to our path. And I usually say when God brings people to our path, there is a reason for the season for this person in your
Mm,
life right now. So you can lose
absolutely.
the season or you can make use of it. So everybody that God bring into your path, like for season, there is a reason. And when they move away, there also is a reason because every season, God is taking you from one step closer to Him. And sometimes He bring people to do so. So a question for you, Jamie, when you were walking away from God or when you walked away from God because of anger and all of that, what are the lessons that you learned about God that kind of like when John asked you to come back, you kind of like, you know what? Yeah, I should come back.
I think it was an interesting one because it went back earlier than that. And when I was a teenager at school and my parents had just separated and the divorce had just happened,
Mm-hmm.
one of the teachers in my school, and I went to a Christian school, one of the teachers said to me, he said, Jamie, you might have turned your back on God, but he hasn't turned his back on you.
Wow.
And that sat with me for a lot of years. And,
Mm-hmm.
as I said, I went off, I did my own thing. I had moments where I came back into church life and was involved in church. And I always had this kind of this niggle, if you like, this slight conflict within where I knew what I was doing wasn't right. I was living outside of what God had called me to. And but I came back to it and then I went back and did my own thing and I came back to it and I had this kind of almost flip-flop relationship with church and what God
Mm-hmm.
had called me
Mm-hmm.
to. But it was when I bumped into John, it was at a moment in my life where I was just in a place where I knew that type of lifestyle, and I was into the kind of the party lifestyle at the time and
Mm-hmm.
everything else, and I knew that lifestyle was bringing me down and down and down. I had a sales manager in the company that I worked for, who pulled me to one side once and he said, "Look, Jamie, if you want to be successful, surround yourself by successful people. Don't surround yourself with people who are going to bring you down. Place yourself in environments where you're going to be surrounded by other people who build you up." And I
Yeah.
think when I bumped into John, I was in that moment where I knew I had to make some changes in my life. And John was one of those guys that I looked up to when I was a teenager. There's that slightly older guy who's a bit cool and
Yeah.
at the time, John was the surfboarder with the long blonde hair and everything else. And I looked up to him as a young teenager, and it was him coming back into my world. I was like, I need to surround myself with people like that who
Mhm.
have this relationship with a God, and there's something about his life that's different, and I want
Mm.
to engage again with that. So for me, when I eventually walked through the doors of the church, I knew
Mhm.
it was where I needed to be, and there was this big sign that actually we put over the door of our church that John used at the time, and that's the words "Welcome home." And it
Wow.
almost became a kind of bit of a kind of I think it almost got kind of overused in the church world and lost its value a bit. But the reason why we've kept it in our church is because actually that's exactly what we want to say to people.
Mhm.
When you walk through the doors of the church, you're returning home. You're returning like the prodigal to your father's house.
Yeah.
And that's what church needs to be. It needs to be a place of welcome, of acceptance, where you're drawn in and you get to be connected into a community.
Yeah.
And welcome home was what I experienced. And as a pastor, welcome home is what I want the people who walk through the doors of our church to experience.
Wow. It's easy to have it on the piece of paper or the entrance or the doorpost
Mm.
saying welcome home. But walk us through if I'm coming into the church you pastor, the church that God allow you to lead now. Let's say I'm walking in. How do you think like I will feel? Explain to our listeners and to myself like what somebody will sense as home when they come into the church that you pastor.
I remember going back to the world of sales and marketing. the big thing that everybody used to say to salespeople was, "You never get a second chance to make a first impression."
That's right.
And it's so true. And church is exactly the same. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So
Mm.
we want to be a church that welcomes the exile home, where people don't feel judged, they don't feel condescended, they don't walk in and feel intimidated by all the Christians in their little circles talking to one another. What happens is they are greeted, loved, and welcomed the minute they walk through the door.
Mm.
We've got a guy, my stepdad Brian. He is our welcome guy, and he's always on the door, and there's others on the door with him as well. But he has this great way of just beaming with a smile and welcoming people into church. So the
Mhm.
first thing you experience is this big kind of, it's great to see you. You are welcome here. Come into church. Let me shake your hand. Not one of these
Mm.
shake your hands, a proper handshake.
Yeah. Yeah.
And people come into church and they're greeted with joy and enthusiasm. And I
Wow.
think that's the thing, is people are made to feel like they're special. And it's
Mhm.
because the community behind it genuinely care about the new people coming through the door. It's not something that just I do as the lead pastor, it's something that the whole church lives, is this welcoming feel.
Yeah.
So we don't have hosting teams and tea and coffee teams, we have connection teams, because their
Okay.
job is to connect people into the life of the church.
Okay. That is beautiful. That is beautiful. Um, Pastor Jamie, when did you first sense God calling you into ministry, and what did that journey of saying yes actually look like?
Yeah, it's great. And I think a lot of that came out of developing in my own relationship with Jesus and
Mm-hmm.
my own love for scripture and my own research. And I got to a stage where in church it was you grow up a Christian, you know the stories, you know all about them, you know about Joseph and you know about Moses and you know these stories that you read in the Bible. But I think for me, it was when the revelation came that those stories, A, bring me into this personal relationship with Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
but also that those stories that I read in the Bible have a personal relevance to me today. And I think when that clicked in my mind, that's when things started to change. And I found myself doing mad things like reading the Bible just because I could,
Mm.
reading, books on biblical theology, digging deeper into the Gospels, what's Romans all about, all of these things.
Yeah.
And I got
Yeah.
excited about Scripture. And through getting excited about Scripture, I found my relationship with Jesus grow stronger and stronger. And
Hmm.
as that relationship grew, then the
Mm-hmm.
burden grew. So
Mm-hmm.
out of the personal relationship with Jesus, I remember there was a song we were singing in church at the time, and the words of the song were, "Break my heart for what breaks yours,
Mm-hmm.
everything I am for your kingdom's cause.
Yes.
Show me how to love like you have loved me."
Mm-hmm.
And that broke me.
Hmm.
And I think it was that move from revelation to a deep burden for the things of the Holy Spirit, for the things
Yeah.
of God, to see his kingdom grow.
Yeah.
And that's what
Yeah.
drove my mission. In the leadership program that I oversee and run now, we get people to do what we call a personal life statement, where they
Mm-hmm.
seek God on, what are you calling me? What are you saying to me? And
Yeah.
for me, it was a very simple thing back in that time, probably around 2009, 10, something like that. And I remember the phrase that just really sort of dug into my mind was this phrase: I'm calling you to see people saved and to see people grow in their faith, knowledge, and relationship with me.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is the very thing that's defined everything that's come since. So what I'll do is I'll line everything I do up with those two things. Am I seeing people saved? And am I being a gospel person, introducing people to Jesus? And am I helping people disciple them in their walk with him so that they can become more and more like him day by day and
Hmm.
explore the calling God's put on their lives?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So you started that church. I will use the for God, it wasn't the worst time, but it was the worst time, I would say. The most difficult time for any leader, any pastor. It was during COVID.
Mhm.
Walk us through why do you sense like that was the time God asking you to start that church? And what were some of the struggles that you went through?
Yeah, so we started the church in 2020 in the UK. There was quite stringent lockdown procedures. But what they began to do is they began to allow churches to meet with some quite strong social distancing rules
Mm-hmm.
attached to it. Um, and what happened was a lot of churches didn't. They didn't reopen the doors. They didn't engage with people. They stayed online, and I can understand that. They felt that was right for them. But where we were at was we'd been part of a big church in a city center. We'd been part of that church as it grew from a small church to a big church in the UK. And we noticed that there was big churches in the city centers, but in the smaller local communities there was none of that.
Mm.
And what meant was during so sorry, I'll roll it back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And when I talk about we, I talk about myself and my wife. We had it in our hearts to take that culture of the spirit filled, full of life church of the city centre into the local
Mm-hmm.
community, and that's kind of what we were looking to do. And then COVID hit, and everything changed, and everybody ended up online, and it was a case of logging online to the weekly service.
Yeah.
And I remember during that time, I remember sitting down with John Cook, who was my lead pastor at the time. I was pastoring one of the services within that church for him, and I remember sitting down to him, and I remember saying, John, I feel like now's the time to plant a church.
Mm.
Now's the time to plant this church out in the community. Bring that type of church into the local community instead of people having to travel to get to it. And John kind of looked at me and he went, "What's taking you so long?"
Oh wow. Okay.
And it was a big challenge to me, and in your head, you're thinking, do I wait until the rules sort of step back a bit and all the rest of it? I thought, no, let's get on with it. So we approached the local community center and said, hey, look, we're starting a church. Can we use your community center? And they said, yes, because nobody else is allowed to meet here, but you are.
Mm.
So we moved into this community center and we started meeting for church with social distancing. And what we basically said is whatever the government say is the rules, we'll do exactly that. So we won't add to them. We won't kind of restrict things further than we have to, and we won't take away from them. So we won't break the rules that the government say. We'll do this with integrity, because we are do unto Caesar what is Caesar's and all the rest of it. And you follow what the rules are of the land, and that's exactly what we did. And we started the church, and what was really interesting was the local MP contacted me because he'd heard I was starting this church in lockdown, and the MP in the UK, that's the member of parliament, and they run the country basically, and each local area has their own MPs, and our local MP contacted me and said, look, we're having conversations about the spiritual needs of the country during the pandemic. Will you join me on a Zoom call? And I said,
Wow.
yeah, no problem. Yeah, let's join you on a Zoom call.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind that I'd been pastoring a church for about 2 weeks at this stage. And I said, yeah, okay, great. Let's do this. And the government had then moved the whole country back into lockdown. So we went online for a few weeks as a church. And this Zoom call happened in that period. And the conversation was all about, should the government on a national level bring churches into lockdown, or actually is there a spiritual need for the community where churches need to stay open even when everything else is shut down? So I logged on to this Zoom call, and at the time my local MP was there. Turned out Boris Johnson, who was the Prime Minister of the UK at the time, was on that Zoom call. The Archbishop of Canterbury was on that Zoom call. The lead Catholic
Okay.
bishop was on that call. There was other big leaders of denominations, and here's me with a tiny church of people that had just started 2 weeks ago, part of this conversation that actually led to the government saying, we will not lock down churches again. That yes,
Wow.
we'll put rules in place, but we're going to keep churches open because there's a spiritual need. And it was a privilege to be able to speak into that environment and be part of that conversation.
Wow. Wow.
But what happened was, back in the January, there was what called, I don't know if it was the same in the States, but in the UK there was the Omicron variant, which saw
Yeah.
things sort of
Yeah.
begin to escalate again. But what they did was they said churches stay open. So we got to stay open as a church. We grew during lockdown because actually what we were doing was meeting the needs of a
Yeah.
local
Yeah.
town and a local community that were isolated in a time of great need. And we brought Jesus to them in a way that we were the only place they could go. So I remember we did a carol service our second month as a church, and we did this carol service where we at the time we were meeting in this community center. The capacity of the community center was 80 people, and what we did was, because of lockdown, we had to socially distance.
Mm-hmm.
So we ended up doing 2 back-to-back carol services with 40 people in each. Everybody sat a particular distance apart. But it was amazing how we got to do stuff like that, because we were just faithful and did everything that we could according to the rules that we had in place. So yeah, we started the church at a very difficult time, but it was great because God really worked through that.
Yeah. Jimmy, walk with me the nerves, the nervousness when you turn on that Zoom link, when you click on that Zoom link and you see all these important people on the call, and they're gonna hear a word of like spiritual word from you, a pastor who started 2 weeks ago. What was going on in your stomach?
I think it's, I mean, I've never been intimidated by people particularly,
Okay.
but it was quite interesting when suddenly the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom's camera came on and he started asking questions of the room. And I think the big moment there, and I think it was quite interesting, this was quite pivotal in the transition from being the lead pastor of a church to being a sort of campus pastor, service pastor within a larger church.
Mm,
Is the decision was, I'm now in a place where, rather than waiting for the key leaders in the room to speak up, actually no,
mm,
I've been invited here to speak.
yeah.
And it was interesting to be able to participate in that conversation. And and luckily I think most of the people in church leadership, with the exception of a couple, were on the same page of let's reopen
Yeah.
churches. So it was
Yeah.
great to be part of that and speak into it. And I found actually everybody was just down to earth and normal when you get to know them, to be fair.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, I'm just thinking of myself, like when I click on that Zoom link, I'm kind of like, oh my goodness, all these people, Um, can you share with us a specific moment when you were desperate for God to show up, and how he met you in that place, and what did that experience do to your faith?
Yes, I mean, we go, I mean, our church now has obviously been operating 5.5 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And in that period, what you find in church leadership is you go through times when everything's fantastic
Mm-hmm.
and church is growing and things are great and your relationships are working really well. But you also go through times in leadership when they're not.
Yeah.
And what happens in those times is you question everything. You question your calling. You question, am I the right person for this? Am I doing this for me, or if what's going on? Why am I doing what am I doing? And what happens is you feel this kind of weight that's very different to how you would to anything else you'd ever felt before. And the struggle's very, very real. We went through a period about 2.5 years ago where a couple who were part of our leadership team had different ideas on what the church looked like, and
Mm-hmm.
they left the church at the time, and it was a very difficult time, and they said some fairly hurtful things about us, and it caused a big split in the church, and that was a really difficult time. And
Hmm.
what that makes you do is it makes you look at yourself. And I think where God met me in that was, it gave me the space to wrestle with the things that I do well and the calling that God's placed on my life, and to gain strength from the fact that God has called me with a purpose. Back to that, see people saved, see people grow in their faith, knowledge,
Yeah.
and relationship with
Yeah.
God. Back to that, but actually also to identify some of the areas in my life where I could do things better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Where I could be, maybe I'm one of these kind of big type A extrovert characters. And for me, there's elements of that where you can say the wrong thing, you can be too brash, you can
Yeah.
be too upfront.
Yeah.
And it
Mhm.
made me really look internally and say, actually, some of this stuff I've got to sort out. Now, a lot of the things that were said at the time were just not true. It wasn't true. But we decided, myself, my wife, and the leadership team that remained, we decided that we would deal with it by just not speaking into it, not giving
Mm.
it air, not giving it space. And what we'd do is we'd faithfully serve God.
Mhm.
You know, we'd look internally, we'd make decisions. Myself, I looked at my leadership style, the things that I did. There's things that I changed. There's things that I believe that were great and God was using at the time. And
Yeah.
it meant that I got to do that. I reflected on that with some really good people that I trust, John being one of them. Other people who are mentors and leaders in my life. We're part of a bigger network in the UK called Elim, which is one of the biggest Pentecostal denominations here. And
Mhm.
my regional leader, we lent into him. And one of the things that I said to him at the time was, I said, look, this is what's being said. Will you just come and have a look at everything that I've done, and
Mhm.
will you just evaluate it? And if you think I've done things wrong, tell me and we'll deal with that appropriately.
Yeah.
And he came in and he investigated and spoke to everybody involved, and he concluded that I hadn't done anything outside of what I was doing as a leader and as a minister, and a lot of the things that were said were false. But I lent on that. So it was a big journey and development for me, where I had to kind of chip away some of the stuff, the brash, abrasive side,
Yeah.
which was true. It was something that I showed, and I had to really kind of lean into God and say, well, actually, am I the right person for you to use?
Mhm.
And I think, and I think for me, that was kind of a big time of decision. I think what it's led to is it's led to a change in my understanding of leadership, where I think even 2.5 years ago, I was one of these people that I wanted things to happen instantly, straight away, and I
Yeah.
did everything I possibly could to make things happen. I'm a doer.
Mhm.
I'm a Peter, get out of the boat and just get on with it. I'm not a waiter. I'm a get out and let's get on with it. And for me, I think what I've learned is actually the timing isn't down to me. It's down to Jesus. It's
Mm.
down to the Holy Spirit. God will work in his time. My job is to serve him faithfully with what he's given me to serve
Yeah.
him with. So what I've done is I've slowed down a lot in a lot of the things that I've done, and focus more on health than growth in the
Mhm.
way that we behave as a church. So I think, in answer to your question, my wrestling was more about how do I lead and how do I lead faithfully.
Mhm.
But it wasn't necessarily everything I did was wrong. It was the fact that I had to modify some of the things I needed to modify to be able
Yeah.
to lead God for God more faithfully.
Jamie, when you said like you're a doer, you want to
Mhm.
go and do and do, and you just said it like, well, God's timing is perfect. So there is that tension now, that friction now between you wants to go and do it and needs to be done. Let's do it now. And God is saying, no, let's just slow down, Jamie. How do you deal with that tension?
I think God requires us to be patient and to trust in Him.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think what happens is if we pray the prayer, God give me patience, what He doesn't do is just go, there you go, there's a nice little handful of patience. You are now patient. What He does is He puts you in environments where you are forced to be patient and rely fully on Him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beautiful thing about the character of God. The very thing that it's easy to be patient if you don't need to be patient. And I think
That's
when
right.
God teaches us the biggest lessons, it's when He places us in environments where we have to do it. So
Hmm.
for me, patience was the big thing. So to make me more patient, God had to put me in an environment where I lost all control over everything and I just had to fully rely on Him.
Yeah.
If you go through something where, say, I don't know, you're struggling with faith, well, the best way for you to develop your faith is to be in an environment where you have to be faithful.
Hmm.
And what God does is he works in our lives to help bring us closer to Him.
Yeah.
And the end goal of a follower of Christ is I want to be more like Jesus. I want
Mm-hmm.
to be more like Him, and I want to serve Him how He's called me to serve Him. To do that, He needs to chip, mold, and adapt me to be better at following Him.
Yeah.
And for me, that was patience.
Wow.
It was less of me and more of Him.
Wow. Yes. Use the word prune.
Mm.
Jesus said you need to abide in me. And, as a farmer, you prune the tree. And those are not fun time for the tree. Sometimes when God is removing things things or people in our lives, it's not easy. And sometimes when God is asking you to cultivate patience, as He put you in situation where you need to be patient, it's not easy. Especially we live in a culture where it's like a type of fast food culture. I want it and I want it now. I want it, I want it now, right now. And God is saying, no, no, take it easy. I have my own timing. And it's not easy for many of us, right?
I think what you said there is really interesting, and there's a lot of talk at the minute about what people would describe as consumer church.
Mm.
I don't know if you've engaged with that or you've seen
Yep.
some of the things. And I think people what they do is they very badly tie consumer church to something that's the church's fault.
Mm.
And they kind of almost tie that to style. So if you
Mm-hmm.
have a big staging platform, an LED wall, and some nice lights, well, that's consumer church. If you're a big church, that's consumer church. But actually, I would argue that consumer church is a mentality of I'm here to get everything I can get out of church.
Mm.
I want to, it's a I want, therefore I get. It's an Amazon next day delivery mentality to
Mm-hmm.
Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a I want now, and I want the best content from the church in the biggest style, in the biggest environment, and it's all about me enjoying church. And actually, for me, that's consumer church, is where churches pander to that mentality of church is here to serve your feelings in any given time.
Mm.
But I don't believe it is. I believe that church is the vehicle that God uses to connect you into His kingdom culture, where
Mm-hmm.
you come together with other believers to live and work and live together. But it's actually also the place where God equips you for what He is calling you to do.
Yeah.
So for me, church is a servant environment rather than a consumer environment. And that to me is what defines how church needs to be. It needs to be not what can I get out of church, it's what can I give to church whilst I grow more like Jesus.
Yeah.
So we in church, we have these three little phrases that define who we are. Our vision is connecting people to God, community, and to purpose. That's our
Yeah.
vision as a church. And what that means is we want to be a place where everyone contributes.
Mm-hmm.
So at church is not somewhere you come just to hang out. Yes, you might be coming from a place of hurt and you need a bit of time to get right, but you shouldn't stay there.
Yeah.
You need to grow beyond that. So for me, everybody, a church where everyone contributes is actually a church where what we're doing is we're developing people to be leaders. We're developing people to grow in their capacity to serve God through the
Mm-hmm.
church community. It needs to be somewhere where everyone contributes.
Yeah.
Secondly, it needs to be somewhere where everyone cares. So one of the things that we don't have at church is a pastoral team. We don't
Okay.
have a specific group of people whose job it is to look out for the needs of the church. We have a culture within the church where everyone looks out for one another.
Mm-hmm.
And the amount of times that I find out somebody's struggling because their community, their connect groups highlight that there's a problem there. And that's when I can get involved and help. It might be the fact that actually some of the needs are met before I even know anything about it. And people will come to me and say, hey, such and such has been struggling with their health. By the way, the people in their lives have got round them, visited them, helped them through. And now it's a praise
Mm.
report for the great things God's done. So we need to be a place where everyone cares, where we look out for one another. And
Yeah.
then the final bit is everyone is a soul winner. Well, actually, I don't know your friends, so I can't tell them about Jesus. You know your friends, So I want to give you the tools to be able to reach them with the gospel hope that's only found in
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. So for me, everyone is a soul winner. Is we want to build a culture as a church where everyone is equipped to go and be the hands and feet of Jesus to the world that they serve.
Yeah.
And whether that's in a work environment, your community environment, college, whatever age you're at, it's about equipping people for the works of service that God has for you. And I believe that's what church needs to look like. Not a
Mm.
consumer place, but an equipping, training, developing place that connects people to God, to godly community, and to the purpose that He's called us to be.
Yeah. So hearing you, I hear like you talk about like being hands and feet of Jesus, telling your neighbors about Jesus, telling your friends about Jesus. In North America, we lots of people find it very hard to go and share about Jesus or share about the Bible because they are worried about what about if they ask me a questions that I have no idea how to answer it? What about if they say this argument and I cannot, you know, have counteract it? What should I do? Pastor Jimmy, you have a heart for the lost. If you were in North America, what would be your approach to Christianity? How would be your approach to tell? How can you help us understand to share the gospel to our neighbors? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you said there is what do you say if you just don't know the answer? Well,
Mm-hmm.
what you say is really simple. I don't know.
Mm.
I'm not gonna. I don't want to answer a question in a way that's not faithful to what my level of knowledge. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell people. I do that now. Um, so you can't do that. But I think you can do something slightly better than that. And for me, again, it's about the church. God works and acts through his church. God is building
Yeah.
his church, and his church is his vehicle to reach a lost and dying world. It's not an event, it's not a YouTuber, it's none of these things. It is through the local church. So for me, if I don't know the answer, what's the best thing to say? Why don't you
I don't
come with
know.
me to
Mm.
church? Not will you meet me at church? Because actually what
Yeah.
happens is people don't come because then they're intimidated by walking in on their
Yeah.
own and that kind
Yeah.
of thing. It
Yeah.
is, hey, look, I'm going to church on Sunday. Why don't you meet me half an hour earlier? We'll have a coffee and then we'll head over together.
Mm-hmm.
And do you know what?
Mm-hmm.
You'll meet some great people and you'll probably have a good time. That's the worst case scenario. Best case scenario is your questions can be answered and
Yeah.
you can meet somebody who'll change your life.
Hmm.
You know?
Oh, that is.
Um, the other thing that we aim to do as a church, and it's available for, I'm sure a lot of churches in the States do that, is we want to help equip our church community with tools to help share the gospel.
Mm-hmm.
So we run regular nights where we train in gospel basics. So what does it mean? What is God's redemption story? A loving God created the world. Sin entered the world, so our relationship with God is broken. Jesus came to restore that relationship, and how can somebody respond and come to know Him? We talk about those fundamental basics to help people do that, and we
Yeah.
give them little cards and all kinds of things to help make that easy. But for me, it's about the relationship that matters.
Mm.
If you want to be a successful evangelist, just to throw in the Christian word and the spiritual
Yeah.
gifting that
Yeah.
goes with it, you have to have a relationship with Jesus yourself, and you have to help guide people to meet him. That's it,
Mm-hmm.
really. And how do you do that? Through relationship. That walk might be 10 years, it might be 2 minutes,
Yeah.
but it's about walking that journey with people. Good friend of mine and an evangelist in the UK, a guy called Mark Greenwood, who's great, by the way. You should have him on his show. He's
I
brilliant.
should.
He wrote a book called Big Yes, Little Yes, Healthy
Mm.
Maybe. And what Big Yes, Little Yes, Healthy Maybe is it's a guide on the different ways that people connect with Jesus.
Mm.
So Big Yes is your Sunday service. Do you want to meet Jesus? Hand in the air. Yes, I'm going to follow Jesus. That's a big yes. A little yes is I want to, okay, I've got a friend who's a Christian and there's something about them and I want to know a little bit more. That's a little yes. I
Yeah.
want to push a little bit further. And a healthy maybe might just be, hey, look, as a church, some of the guys, we're going to have a barbecue tonight. We're going to hang out. Why don't you come? Yeah, okay. It's a bit of a healthy maybe. And as followers of Christ, we need to create big yes, little yes, and healthy maybe moments for our friends. And it's just a great little tool to do that. So I encourage you to check out Mark Greenwood's book. I'm hoping it's available in the States. If not, I'm sure you can get in touch with him and he'll send a load out to you.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Well, thank you. Let me change the gear a little bit here.
Yep.
What's something you feel like God is teaching you right now?
I think probably one of the things that we're seeing in church at the moment is quite a strong pushback against
Mhm.
the apostolic leader.
Okay.
And when I say the apostolic leader, I'm using kind of the Christian terms to describe your kind of your type A character, big leader. And I think there's a bit of a pushback for that. And I read a lot these days about shepherding over the apostolic and the evangelist and everything else and focusing on that. And that's not a bad thing. I think it's something that we need to do as a church. But what God's saying to me as somebody who would say, I would probably say that for me, my kind of spiritual gift is in the apostolic area, is that actually it's okay to be an apostle. It's okay to be that person that spearheads the new, the person that goes after the things of God, that makes things go. And actually, what I'm really interested in is, as a church, if we remove all the apostles, what happens to the church?
Mm.
Does it die out because you've lost the entrepreneurial gifting within the church? So I think that's where I'm at the minute. It's the big, how do we create space for the entrepreneurial apostolic leader to be able to be all that God's called them to be
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a world
So,
that's pushing back against that a little
yeah.
bit?
How do you define an apostle?
I think the apostolic leader is the church planter, the missional entrepreneur, the person who goes out and doesn't accept the status quo, but wants
Mhm.
to change things for Jesus. That's what I would say is the apostle.
Okay. I've heard
So
that discussion.
like Paul
Mhm.
went and planted churches across the known world at the time,
Yeah.
and never stopped despite all the struggles that he faced.
Yeah.
And it's that character that says, no, the status quo isn't enough. I'm going to serve Jesus and I'm going to do everything I can to see his
Yeah.
kingdom grow.
So do you think there's a big I've heard people saying there's mini A apostle and big A apostle. What's your approach to that?
Yeah, I think there is. There's apostle as in we will all do apostolic things as churches.
Mhm.
Anybody in leadership has to have an element of apostle about them. But I think it's about separating the apostolic gifted character, which I think is your big A apostle, the
Okay.
person whose character is my way of doing things is I'm a and I talked about my front foot forward way of doing things.
Mhm.
That to me is a big A apostolic gifted person. Whereas little A is the action of doing things for Jesus.
Okay.
And I think apostle is a spiritual gift, big A, whereas there's also the little A, the things we do are spearheading and we're launching new things, we're doing new things, and
Yeah.
we're sort of furrowing the ground so that God can
Yeah.
bring a harvest. That's something we all do. But I think there's particular characters who do that in a way that others just don't.
Yeah. In my circle, when I hear the word, when I hear the discussion like big A apostle, small A,
Mm,
they refer to, and feel free to push back. They refer to like the big A apostles is like the 12 or the 11
mm,
before Judas got kind of like hung himself, or the disciples. They were the one that received the command to go. Like they are the ones, and the small A apostles is like we who are like leaders. What would be your approach to that?
So I think my probably slight pushback to that is I think sometimes what we can do is we can look at people and think, well, they're a leader, I'm not.
Mm,
But I believe that we're all called to lead, and I believe that we're all called to lead to one degree or another. So
mhm.
whether God's called me to lead a church of 10,000 people, and I don't, but if God has called some to lead churches of 10,000 people. Other people have been called to lead their families well.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make you a little A apostle. That makes you a big A apostle in the sphere of influence that God's given you. And I think for me, as somebody who I run a course a number of years ago, so to give you an idea of another hat that I wear, I work for Cranmer Hall, which is a church training college within the University of Durham.
Mm-hmm.
And I started working there sort of 3.5 years ago, and my role was to launch a leadership development course to help develop leaders at all levels of church throughout the region that we're in the northeast of England. And now we have sort of 3 sites, 100 to 200 people a year, all going through that course.
Mm-hmm.
But what we tend to say to people in that course is we tend to give people permission to be the leader God's called them to be. Now, that's not about character. It's not about personality. It's not about, extrovert versus introvert. It's about using the influence that God has given you to reach a lost and dying world,
Mm-hmm.
to help disciple people. And I think big A apostle is something we could all be. We've just got to remember that the sphere of influence changes, not the spiritual gifting that God's given us.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation.
But feel free to challenge me on it. I'm more than happy to be challenged on it.
I'll keep that for another time. We can
We can do a part 2 about that. Yeah.
yeah. So if your life could preach one message without words, what would you want it to say?
If my life could preach one message without words,
Mm-hmm.
it would be the one thing that if my life stood for anything, it would be that Jamie showed people Jesus and helped people follow what God was calling them to do. Roger Gill, who was a visiting professor at the Durham School of Business, wrote a book called The Theory and Practice of Leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And in that, he said, leadership is showing the way and helping or inducing others to pursue it. And if I wanted to look at my life and I wanted my life to tell a story without me having to say it, it would be that. Jamie showed people the way. He pointed people to Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
and he helped people to follow that way, to follow the ways of Christ, to grow closer to him, and to grow closer to the calling that God had placed on them lives. So
Wow.
so that would be it, really. That's what I'd want people to see in me and in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. That is really good. That is really good. So can you share with us, Jamie, a story where you saw God move in a way that you couldn't explain any other way?
Yeah. It's really interesting. I remember going back a number of years, I was working in sales and marketing. I felt God calling me to study full time. Now, at the time, I had a good job. I was doing well for myself.
Mm-hmm.
Finances weren't a struggle at the time. And I also, in the February of 2013, I got married. So met my wife through church, in church. We'd grown closer together. And we got married in February 2013. The plan was I had a good job. She could do a little bit of a few things that she enjoyed. And
Mm-hmm.
my wage was enough for us to kind of cover the bills and that kind of thing. Roll on the August of that year, and I felt God calling me to give it all up and go and study and serve him. So now that was a big decision because I'm a newly married guy. This is where we're at as a family.
Yeah.
At
Yeah.
the same time, my wife really felt that God was calling her into teaching. So in August 2013, newly into our marriage, we both quit our respective jobs, moved into a much smaller house, and basically said, God, you've called us into something new. You'll provide for us.
Hmm.
And one of the things that came to mind was a song by Hillsong Young and Free. They'd brought out a song a number of years earlier called Hindsight. And the words of that song are, "My God isn't finished yet. He's done it before. He'll do it again.
Hmm.
I can trust him with what's next, because the God I know is known for faithfulness."
Mhm.
So in that season, what we did was we said, look, we're going to just trust you, God. And we gave up our jobs. We both went back to study full time. And what happened was, I remember one particular month at the time, I did a bit of DJing part time, just because I enjoyed it. Did DJing,
Okay.
doing parties, bits and pieces, and I enjoyed that. I love my music, and that was my way of expressing that was DJing. And I remember Helen and I, my student finance in the UK, student finance is what you get as a student, and it's kind of, you get loans to pay for it. That hadn't come through. And we were in a position where we had to pay our rent, we had to pay our bills, and all that was due out in a couple of days. And for me, we had no money. Now, I did this little part-time DJing gig that was great. I'd go out and I'd earn a bit of extra money and enjoy myself at the same time. And in this period, I remember saying to God, look, I have no idea how we're going to pay the bills. I don't know where the money is going to come through. And I got a call off a local venue in Newcastle. And this was in the sort of November that year. And they said, look, we haven't got a DJ to cover our November events. Can you help? And I thought, well, yeah, I can help. I can DJ. That's not a problem. And they said, no, I don't think you understand what we're asking. We have, over December and the back end of November, we would need 4 DJs every night for the whole of the month. Can you provide that? Can you provide all these DJs? And for me, I was like, not really. But I just felt like I should say yes. And I said yes. I said, great, I'll get contract paperwork across to you. Let's get this done. Yes, I can do that. And I ended up finding DJs for all these jobs, providing all these jobs. And that contract covered every penny that we needed for the bills for that month and the next 3 or 4 months, to be fair. And
Wow.
God provided in our need. This was a huge contract. It took that DJ business from a little hobby that I did occasionally to one of the largest in the region. I
Wow.
ended up with 7 or 8 DJs out working most weekends for me full time. It was a big business, and that business paid me through university. It covered our costs, it covered our overheads. Through that time, I also did a bit of consultancy in the industry that I used to be part of. But the DJ business was something that blew up at that time and became a
Yeah.
big industry. 3 years later, when I finished the theology course, that business slowly became a little hobby that I did
Wow.
occasionally. And through that time, God provided. How did he do
Yeah.
it? He gave me a business when I needed a business. He
Mm.
gave me an income when I needed to be an income. And that meant that when I look back now, I'm currently, let me tell you where we are as a church. We've just moved into a new building as a church. We've moved into a big warehouse as a church.
Mhm.
That's cost us a lot of money. Our
Mhm.
reserves are gone as a church. We haven't got the financial backup that we had. And I looked at the bank account just today, and there's currently £300 in our bank account as a church.
Hmm.
That is pressure. It's
Mm.
daunting. I don't know where those money's coming from, but I know that the God I know is known for faithfulness.
Yeah.
That he's done it
Yeah.
before, he'll do it again. I can trust him with what's next. My hindsight says the God I know is known for faithfulness. So for
Wow.
me, I look at struggling with the finances of the church now.
Mm.
I look at the things that we've been through. I look at periods in my life with the church, with organizations that I've led and been part of in ministry. Every time I know that my God is faithful and I can rely on him, because do you know what? I'm not basing it on nothing. I'm basing on because he's done it before.
Yeah.
I can trust him with what's next because he's faithful.
Yeah.
And that's the season that we're in now. It's the season that we were in back then. God will provide because he's a great God and he's called me to do this. I'm just doing what he's called me to do.
Yeah.
His bit's helping me do that.
Well, Jimmy, I feel like we can keep going, can keep chatting. We're on a roll. But just to respect our listeners' time and your time, If you could leave the church with one encouragement today, what would that be?
We do a session in our Growing Leaders course where we talk about certain aspects. We talk about we talk about everything from strategy to values to mission and all of the things that you need to know in leadership about what's the character leader. We talk about all of that stuff. But there's one little moment towards the end of the course where people are kind of starting to think about what next, where's God taking
Hmm.
me? And I, as an individual, I have quite a collection of trainers. Trainers, you're in the States, sneakers. And I collect. I've got a few different pairs of sneakers, and one of the brands that I love when in the world of sneakers is Nike in the States,
Okay. Yeah.
and they have a little motto, and it's something that every person in faith needs to hear, and that motto is just
Do it.
do it,
Yeah.
just do it. Sometimes we can spend so long waiting. Well, if God does this, then I will.
Mm.
If this particular circumstance changes, then I will. If these things start to happen, then I will. Well, I think sometimes we miss the biggest opportunities God puts in front of us because we don't just do it.
Mm.
And I would rather be somebody who just does it, gets it wrong, and does it again slightly different than somebody who never does it at all.
Wow.
So, for people listening, if you want to know what's God calling you to do, push some doors, have a
Mm.
go, get it wrong, lean on Him.
Mm.
And do you know what? If you get it totally wrong and you muck up, He'll pick you up. He'll say, I'm there for you, my child, and He'll
Yeah.
help you do something different next time. But I'd rather have a go than not have a go. So there's my advice. Just
Wow.
do it.
Do it. Well, thank you so much, Pastor Jamie. It was a pleasure to have you with us. And thank you so much for being with us today. Either you're watching or listening, it was a pleasure to have you with us. And we are interested in listening to your story as well, or to do a little interview with you as well to hear what God has been doing in your life, because we do know that God is at work in your lives. And if you're above ground, it's because God is not done with you yet. And this is why we have this channel, so that when you listen to stories like Jamie's stories, my story, other stories, you can say, if God can do this through them, for them, and in them, He can do it in you as well. We'll love to hear your story. So email us at inspirehopepodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, and Pastor Jamie, it was a pleasure to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure being with you, Samuel.
You take care, brother. Until
You
next
too.
time.
God bless.